Hi, this is Derrick Chow, and you're listening to True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's November 23rd, 2020. I'm John Swinimer. If you have a comment, criticism, or question, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Derrick Chow about WhitCAF 2020. The podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. And don't forget to check out the new YouTube channel. Hosted by the Whitby Library in Whitby, Ontario, the annual Comic Arts Festival celebrates comic book creators and makers in a variety of fun and entertaining activities, including exhibits, panels, readings, artist alley, contests, and more. Derrick is a comic creator and illustrator, having appeared in many publications, including the Literary Review of Canada, This Magazine, and the Toronto Star. More recent comic works include the story Break and Enter in Young at Heart, the Toronto Comics Anthology, and Mooncake Madness in the Hogtown Horror Anthology. He also illustrated the new edition of the classic Margaret Hillard picture book, Come Play With Me for Norwood House Press. So without further ado, here's my chat with Derrick Chow about WhitCAF 2020. Derrick Chow, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Thank you for having me.
Super. What I normally do to start off the interview is ask creators about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
Well, in terms of comics, I have to admit, the very first, most vivid memory I have of really getting into it were the Sunday Funnies in the newspaper. Mm-hmm. And from there, I started to buy more long-form comics in the form of, like, Disney, DuckTales, serialized comics, and I was a big Disney fan when I was a kid, so a lot of sort of Disney serialized comics based on Saturday morning cartoons. But I think the first comic of any substance that I remembered that really left an impression for me was From Hell.
Oh, right.
By Alan Moore, which I read when I was probably too young. I was in elementary school, but I came across it at a friend's house, and I was always into horror movies and true life documentaries about serial killers, anything creepy, and so the idea of a Jack the Ripper graphic novel was intriguing, and I was enthralled. The art was so beautiful, and it was such an interesting take on the story, and yeah, I'd say that was my first graphic novel that I read.
Wow, that's pretty intense. That's for sure. So I'm wondering, who or what inspires you to create today?
Well, in terms of comics, there are so many artists and writers. Well, let me think. Emily Carroll is one creator who everything that she does I absolutely adore. She has a really creepy sensibility. I recently read a graphic novel that I really enjoyed called Bloom by Kevin Panietta. And it's sort of a sweet love story, contemporary love story about two teenage boys falling in love. And I really enjoy slice of life tales a lot. So anything with a lot of heart tends to get to me. I also, in terms of just visuals and art, a lot of my inspiration kind of goes beyond actual comic artists. So one of my favorite illustrators is Elizabeth Zwerger, who is quite prolific, and she illustrates children's picture books, but her art is so mature, and her art is so distinct that even as an adult, I really enjoy looking at her work, and there's always an atmosphere that she infuses in it that kind of makes it rise above what you would think a children's book would be. So yeah, she's a big inspiration of mine.
So I'm wondering, what is your newest project that you're promoting today?
Well, the newest one I can talk about is a short story I created called The Garden for a comic anthology called Rainbow Reflections, Body Image Comics for Queer Men. It has a long title. It came out from Ad Astra Press this past spring. So it's essentially a collection of comics that have to do with queer men and their experience with body image, with moving through the world, with certain expectations of how they should be, how they should look, and quite a diverse range of stories. And I was really happy to be part of that.
Now, is that book available today for purchase?
Yes, it is. You can find it online at Ad Astra Comics. It's also available in some smaller local comic shops. So if you're in Toronto, I believe they carry it at the WhitCAF bookshop and also Glad Day. In other parts of the country or Ontario, I'm not sure, but I think you could probably start with the website and find your way from there.
Now, just want to step back a bit and talk a bit about your process, or perhaps how you got your start in making comic books. I'm wondering if you could sort of walk us through how you got involved in the whole thing.
Well, my first sort of creative endeavor with comics started with just in the school paper in high school. I really enjoyed creating panel funny comics for the paper, and when I got to university, I sort of expanded it and was doing sort of full page funnies for the local college paper there. Then after I graduated, I mostly focused on being an editorial illustrator, but certainly writing prose and short stories was something that was always part of my creative repertoire. And eventually I realized I love reading comics. I should also combine my love of writing with my love of art. And so a number of years after that, I started submitting to anthologies, wanting to create short stories with them. And the first anthology I did a short story for was Hogtown Horror, which was a horror anthology about stories kind of set vaguely in Toronto. And from there I did a few more, and I think anthologies are a great way to sort of learn and grow and hone your craft as a comic artist and writer.
That's a good suggestion for sure. I wonder if you have any other advice for newcomers wanting to make comic books.
Well, other than the obvious, which is read a lot, but and really also read a lot of genres and styles and voices you wouldn't necessarily normally gravitate towards, because oftentimes that's where you find stuff that surprises you. And when it comes to actually getting down and creating a comic, I'd say just start short. I found, for me, starting with just trying to capture maybe a conversation or a mood in just a few panels or just a page was a great way to sort of wet my whistle and get an idea of the art style I want to put across. And just, I think that's the best way to do it. Just start short, start small, and just grow from there.
Good advice. Now, you talked a bit about your current project, but I wonder if you have any future projects that are in the works that you are allowed to talk about.
Sure, I can talk vaguely about a few, I suppose.
Okay.
So I have been working on a graphic novel that it's semi-autobiographical, kind of based on my experience as a sibling of a brother who had severe mental illness while I was growing up. So it's a graphic novel that's sort of a coming-of-age tale mixed with some horror elements and sort of magic realism elements to it to convey what it feels like being a child in a home that is dealing with major mental illness. So that is something that has been taking up a lot of my time. Also, in addition to comics, I also write just regular prose stories. So there is a children's horror that I had been working on for a while, sort of a fantastical take on the Pied Piper of Hamelin. And yeah, so these are projects I think I'll be able to talk more about them at some point soon, but that's kind of all I can say right now.
Sure. No, understandable. So I'm wondering where people can find out more about these future projects and perhaps buy some of your books online. Do you have any social media support for yourself too?
Let me start, I guess, with my Twitter. My handle is Derrick Chow 2. My name DerrickChow, the number 2. Or you can just go straight to my website, which is where you can see a lot of my art and just keep up to date. And that's derrickchow.ca.
Well, Derrick, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering if there's something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview.
I think as a comic consumer, whether you're someone who wants to create comics or read comics, there are so many great festivals such as, WhitCAF, and just locally so many small and large festivals and conventions that you can go to meet creators and to find new books. And I think it's a great time to be a fan, and it's a good time to sort of get out there. Well, not during the pandemic, but get out there, maybe digitally meet people, follow people's Twitters and Instagrams. I think the great thing about comics is I think a lot of the gates are opening, and there are a lot more varied voices out there. So it's a really exciting time to get out there and hear some of those voices.
Thanks to Derrick for the chat. You can discover more about Derrick on Twitter at DerrickChow2 and online at derrickchow.ca. You can discover more about WhitCAF 2020 at whitbylibrary.ca/WhitCAF. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts, and please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2020.